Hey there, everybody, and happy spooky season. It is I, the Terrorific Lady, otherwise known as Brandy, and guess who we got back? I drug him back here kicking and screaming. It is David Weiner, the writer, director, and producer of a little gem you might know, In Search of Darkness, the complete journey into 80s horror. And I guess he decided that talking about the 80s was not enough, because now he is going to be doing a documentary about 90s horror. So, David, welcome back. Great to have you here.
Not really kicking and screaming. I'm actually here on my own free will. Just check my eyes and the Morse code and what I'm saying right now.
Yeah.
No. That happy to be back. Happy to be talking about a whole new decade of horror that I think a lot of people either dismiss or overlook or secretly love, but they can't say it out loud. And so we're here to talk all about that and, the next In Search of Darkness installment.
And the next Search of Darkness installment, got a little bit tongue-tied there, will focus specifically on the years 1990 to 1994, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we're going to try something a little different this time. Normally when we do, for the uninitiated, In Search of Darkness, the first one, 2018 came out, and it's a 4.5-hour documentary that covers the decade of 80s horror from 1980 to 1989, year by year, movie by movie, with larger context chapters in between. It was just so well received. We got to do a part 2 that was well received. We got to do a part 3. Next thing we know, we've got 14 plus hours of an exploration into a decade. And now we're moving into the 90s. We thought we'd try something a little different. We're still going to do long form documentaries that are crowdfunded, but what we're going to do is we're going to do it in 2 parts. And so we're working on only now focusing on 1990 to 1994. Same concept with each year has a bunch of films that we're going to do, and then larger context chapters in between. What's cool and what's different about this, other than the fact that we're dividing the decade into 2 pieces, we're also going to be covering some television as well this time around. And the reason why I didn't do television in Search of Darkness for the 80s was there was just so much to tackle that we just couldn't fit that in as well, much as I would have liked to. And it's the same thing here, believe it or not. And once we start talking about all this stuff, people are going to be like, really? Oh yeah, that's right. Their memories are going to be jogged, and they're going to realize that there's just so much of that happened in the 90s that was so cool, because you had theatrical and straight to video, but there's all this cool stuff where horror really was getting some momentum on the small screen as well. And I don't want that to pass that by. So I want to be able to include that in some way, shape, or form as well. So that's definitely part of the discussion.
Yeah, I can remember a lot of stuff that came on TV in the 90s that I watched probably a little bit too young. Tales from the Crypt and It are 2 that immediately come to mind.
Yes, Stephen King, of course. The movies were a little more hit and miss in the early 90s. If you were a Stephen King movie, on one hand you might have Needful Things, but on the other hand, or Misery, some top tier things, but on the other hand, a movie like Graveyard Shift or something like that was going to be more. Lots of people love that. There's some great performances. I saw that first night, Friday night it was open, because I wanted to see, Stephen King and Graveyard Shift, and I love Night Shift, and I love all his short stories. Not quite what I was expecting, yet it's still fun, especially when you go back to it, Brad Dourif's performance. But my point is, there was lots of Stephen King, and more and more stuff was coming to television. So you had the miniseries, you had the Stand miniseries, sometimes they come back, the Tommyknockers, Langoliers, and so on and so forth. Langoliers, I think, is 95, so I'll mention it, but we won't really go into it too much. Although Langoliers is notable for its craptastic CGI, giving its best to make spiky Pac-Man wing munchers look real, but it didn't quite, I think, sell it as best as the imagination could.
It tried its best, but
I'm trying to be diplomatic. That's the thing about all these things is I think we all, if I've learned anything, and if you guys from watching In Search of Darkness have learned anything, I try and put everything on an even playing field and not to pass judgment. And we all kind of know where these things sit in terms of the quality factor, but there's the appreciation factor and there's the nostalgia factor. And then there's the it meant a lot to me because ... factor. And that's what's all important for all of these movies. And it's going to be the same treatment for the 90s as well.
And speaking of nostalgia, I remember in our last interview, we talked a little bit about how you were a nostalgia curator and about how you were a 70s kid and an 80s teen. Well, I'm an 80s kid and a 90s teen, and the 90s holds so much nostalgia for me. So what kind of nostalgia does the 90s hold for you in particular?
You know, it's interesting because I'm having a ball going back to a lot of the 90s horror and genre films that I saw in the theater and on video when they first came out, but I have not returned to a lot of them in 20 or 30 years. I mean, I have my favorites that I go back to practically yearly, you know, like Tom Savini's Night of the Living Dead remake is one of my all-time favorites. And that's like a spooky season staple for me. I love putting that in. It's like comfort food, you know. But there's some other films that like I just rewatched recently California with David Duchovny and Michelle Forbes. And it's not Mickey and Mallory this time, but you've got Juliette Lewis and you've got Brad Pitt as and Juliette. I don't want to spoil. I'm already wanting to spoil things. It's a road trip. It's about serial killers. It's about careful who you road trip with, is all I'll say. But I had not seen that movie since I had seen it in the theater, and I wanted to revisit that. And all these early horror and they called a lot of horror movies thrillers, psychological thrillers, or erotic thrillers. You know, if it's a movie about a serial killer, is it a horror movie or is it a thriller? They being the Hollywood studios, in order to market the stuff, they wanted to go horror, but they still felt like the horror was a stigma to a certain degree. Silence of the Lambs actually accomplished a lot in making a psychological thriller that was clearly just a horror film, but quote unquote elevated, the word we love to hate. Yeah. You know, winning all the Oscars, getting all the attention. A whole new trend of serial killer films was let loose upon the world. Horror had evolved and horror was transitioning during this time. In terms of what we called these films, how we perceived these films, who wanted to make these films? A-listers, right? A-listers were like, I want to make my horror movie now. But they still, as Hollywood and marketers, were doing their best to kind of sidestep the plethora of the huge abundance of horror movie that was coming out of the 80s. People who weren't paying too much attention, they're just like, I don't want to be associated with all these slasher Friday the 13th knockoffs. We're not making a Freddy Krueger movie. We're not making a Pinhead movie. Ours is a thriller. It's a psychological thriller. So call it what you may, it's still a great movie for the audience. And A-listers, A-listers were just jumping on this stuff. So you have Brad Pitt. You see him in Interview with the Vampire. Tom Cruise, he's like, I want to be a vampire. I want to do this as well. You've got Francis Ford Coppola. He's just like, I want to do this too. And I'm going to make this a high level Bram Stoker's Dracula, yet you've got Anthony Hopkins chewing up the scenery. You've got Keanu Reeves, Winona Ryder, and of course, Gary Oldman in a bravura performance. And not to be outdone, Kenneth Branagh was like, well, wait, I want to do Frankenstein. Let's call it Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And now it's literary too. And now we get Robert De Niro to do this, and Helena Bonham Carter, an all-star in it. Jack Nicholson is checking this out from the sidelines while he's watching his Laker games. And he's like, I want to do a monster movie too. Get Mike Nichols on the phone. We'll do Wolf, and that'll be cool as well. Get Michelle Pfeiffer and James Spader. So much good stuff in the early 90s. I'll be quiet.
No, I just love hearing you talk about this stuff. And you brought up a good point with the whole horror versus thriller kind of thing. It's almost just like a case of, oh, the elevated horror, like capital, like was it
Which they
capital
were
M?
calling at the time, by the way. That's something I think then if they could use it, they would have, though.
I've noticed in research about horrors versus thrillers is the reason for the confusion is those genres cross over so much. That's a side note, but like you can cross over horror with a thriller with a horror. They can all have elements of each, so I get why people get so confused by what's
Yeah, but you had it's a subgenre as well. There were like the female, not necessarily a serial killer, but you had single white female. You had the hand that rocks the cradle. You even had like Sleeping with the Enemy. You know, movies like this where, or of course, Basic Instinct. Are they the killer? Are they not? Are they a femme fatale? And it's a new environment where we could just add more kills now. What is it? Is this a modern film noir? Who knows what you want to call it? All I know is that when there are people being murdered and lots of them in creative ways, that sounds a lot like horror to me, however you want to window dress it.
Exactly. It seems like horror to me. I mean, I don't know. I agree with you there.
Pacific Heights with Michael Keaton as an evil landlord. Listen, if the landlord wants to off you, that's pretty horrific. That's my opinion.
I've never seen Michael Keaton as evil. Now I have to check that out.
Oh yeah. Pacific Heights. Haven't seen that one in 100 years either, but that would qualify.
Yeah.
Once you get into subgenre territory, whether it's home invasion, which is sort of like an adjacent horror genre as well. Listen, I mean, you call it thriller as much as you want. There's some really good films with really great actors that we know and love that really wanted to get part of this this sort of genre filmmaking and storytelling, and there was an abundance of it, especially when there was all the straight to video stuff as well. Back then, there was still a stigma with going straight to video versus theatrical release, but there was plenty of stuff, especially in sequel territory, that was going straight to video that we all have very fond memories of. Well, I couldn't get Pacific Heights on video because it was all rented out. So what is this? Oh, 976 Evil 2. Hey, I didn't even know they made that. Did Robert Englund have anything to do with this? I don't know, but let's rent it and give it a try.
Yes, oh gosh, so many different like kinds of films that come out on video during that time. My mind's already going to different places.
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, so many. Oh, you know, and just with all the straight to video stuff, you had the icons and the pioneers of the direct to video movement, where you have, you know, Charlie Band, you've got Lloyd Kaufman, Roger Corman. They were cooking with gas by the time the 90s came along because they perfected they're bypassing the studio system and making their own movie, put it out on video, making a mint on it, and rinse and repeat. And so Charlie Band has got Full Moon Entertainment, and the Puppet Master movies, the Subspecies movies, Demonic Toys, which is a movie I even worked on. I worked at Full Moon Entertainment in 1990 when I first came out to Los Angeles, running around working on that. So I was adjacent to all those films, or even worked on a couple. I worked on Puppet Master 3 for a little bit. My pals were working on Netherworld. I remember when Stuart Gordon's Pit and the Pendulum was shooting in Italy at Charlie's Castle. My roommate was the production coordinator on Subspecies and Netherworld as well. That's how I got on these movies and adjacent to these movies. It was most definitely a fly on the wall when it came to that kind of stuff.
That's kind of like so cool. I know I'd probably freak out if I was on any kind of horror movie set. Oh my god!
Well, it's just neat. It's interesting and boring because back then it took so long to set up an effect, and like if you're on Demonic Toys, where the majority of that shoot, and I was working locations for that. We were at a warehouse in downtown Los Angeles. So a heavy portion of that was me just sitting outside. I didn't have to manage that location once I was there unless some problem popped up. So I remember there was just so much time to set up doll kill shots. I don't know. I think I just like sucked the wind out of the excitement there. But on the flip side, it's cool just to see the whole setup and to get all these movies cranked out and be there at a time when all this stuff was appreciated then and appreciated even more now.
Yeah, it sounds like really cool, just the inner workings and behind the scenes things. That kind of stuff like always fascinates me. The method behind the madness, so to speak.
Oh yeah, it's fun. You know, all the movie magic that like some of the most basic, and I don't want to get too tangential here, but some of the
Yeah.
most basic stuff is really fun because they're like, well, we're going to shoot this at the location, and then you're in a warehouse where they're shooting because it's a warehouse and they want that setting, but then you go to another room and they've built like the back door of the house that you shot at 2 weeks ago because there's a scene where they knock on the door and they walk in or they exit and some effect happens and they need to do it in a controlled environment because it's destructive or just there's elements that they have to add to it or effects. And no one will ever know because they've sold the idea that there's a real house there. So when they do that close up to the back door of the house, you don't think twice that it's not at that house, but you're literally different time, different place, literally a fabricated fake back door. And it's kind of fun seeing the movie magic and how perception is created and then manipulated just to get things done simply.
Yep. I kind of got us off on that tangent, so let me kind of do a U-turn and bring us back.
Yeah, there we go. That's where we go. What are we talking about? Halloween, right?
Well, let's go ahead and talk about this term that came up whenever I was reading the synopsis for In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994. The 90s are called the Forgotten Decade of Horror. And I find that so fascinating because, in my opinion, I did notice that for quite some time, people dismissed the 90s, just like, oh, this stuff is garbage, it's crap, and anyone other than hardcore horror fans, like, no, Mania, right, and all the other horror fans out there. No, just us. But yeah, others seem to dismiss it. So with In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994, what do you hope this documentary will bring to life?
I think those of us in the know love our select 90s movies. But a couple things. One, I think a lot of people forget that a lot of the 80s icons and sequels were very much in that first half of the 90s. Mm-hmm. You had Leatherface, you had Freddy Krueger, you had Chucky, you had, did I mention Freddy?
Yeah, well, he deserves 2 mentions.
Well, he does, literally, because they killed him off in Freddy's Dead, and then they brought him back 3 years later in Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Yeah.
But my point is that these well-known icons were either petering out or just getting started. Chucky was just getting warmed up with Child's Play 2 and 3. You've got Hellraiser 3, Leatherface coming back in 1990 with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. Here's what I'm saying. Ultimately, people like to divide a very strong line between decades. So they say once 1990 happened, all the good stuff that were in the 80s just kind of disappeared. And 1990, what there is no definitive what until maybe Silence of the Lambs. But then after that, I don't know. Do we have to wait until Scream and the teen cycle of, I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend and Kevin Williamson? It's a lot of people when they look back at that, they're like, not much happened. And the thing is, so much happened. But I think a lot of people gloss over it. And I think a lot of people during that decade, as it was happening, because the 80s were so powerful and influential and at the zenith of, practical effects, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the CGI were starting to take the place or go alongside or replace practical effects in these movies, and the effects were not very good. Sometimes they were good, but for the most part they were memorably bad. But when you look back at this, so I think that's part of why people want to dismiss that whole era, just saying, I don't want to think about that. But the thing is, you have to recognize that there was, again, with all that straight to video stuff, again, with all these A-listers wanting to jump on movies, and you've got Oliver Stone doing Natural Born Killers. You have even Cape Fear, Martin Scorsese doing that, creating an absolute thriller, a bit of a horror movie. God, if Max Cady was tormenting me, I'd be horrified, right? Especially smoking that cigar in a theater going, ah, ha, 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 right in front of me. But it's a bit of a lost decade because I think a lot of people dismissed it. And it's a bit of a lost decade or a misunderstood decade because when you look back at it, it's only when you really start paying attention that you realize that there's so much amazing, great stuff. And it's a bit of a lost decade because I think some of the masters like John Carpenter were still making their stuff, but still overshadowed by the power of his 80s output. So he's doing In the Mouth of Madness. I think so many people love that, but that's a bit of an underrated movie by John Carpenter. He did the remake of Village of the Damned, but it was a remake. Maybe it wasn't as good for some people. But on the flip side, you also had like say Wes Craven, who was at the top of his game, and he is starting to experiment with meta filmmaking and with socio-political commentary, but making it incredibly entertaining, like with The People Under the Stairs. Or you have Wes Craven's New Nightmare, where he's definitely playing in the meta sandbox before Scream by having Robert Englund and Heather Langenkamp playing themselves. He plays himself in this movie where Freddy's really real and he's coming to life from the ether. And so it's pretty cool. It's a bit of a lost decade, but I think for through this film, it will draw everyone's attention to the fact that there was so much good stuff. They're going to say, David, why wasn't this movie in there? Why wasn't that movie in there? And how could you forget this movie? And what a crime that you wouldn't even mention this one. But I did see that poster on the wall.
There's going to be so much to talk about in the 90s that I know it's going to be impossible to cram every single movie in there. So kind of talk a little bit about, or every single movie and TV show, I should say, since it's all going to touch on TV shows, but tell me a little bit more about how you're going to choose exactly what movies and TV shows to put in there.
Well, it's a bit of an alchemy with the talent that we get. Because Brad Dourif sits with us. This is all speculative. I don't want to say anything definitive because I want to keep some surprises. But for example, if you have Brad Dourif sitting there with you, of course you want him to talk about Child's Play, but you want him to talk about Exorcist 3. You want him to talk about, he's in Graveyard Shift, right? Very eccentric character as this rat exterminator, but he's also in Grim Prairie Tales. And a variety of other films. That's a video staple that I think people, it had a very quick theatrical release, but that's one of those things that was always on the video shelf, Grim Prairie Tales. So there's a certain alchemy where, depending on the cast you get, you want to be able to focus more on some of the movies that they were in, which is great. I always love that. Some people say, well, they chose that movie because they had the actor or the director or the writer. But of course, why wouldn't you? And you get to go into some of the deeper cuts because they've got the first person tales of, tales from the crypt of what it was like. So choosing these films is always difficult, but we recruited you guys to help us. And the idea is that over the past several months, have had a survey and lots of stuff on social media, just saying, what's your favorite this, what's your favorite that? It prevents me from working in a vacuum, saying, well, I like these movies, but I wonder if anyone else likes these movies. Or do I have to do this? Or what's the more eclectic title that everyone likes a lot more than I realize? It's just like, does anyone like Trickster from Brain Scan, or does nobody care? And so these are what helps me choose. And at the end of the day, I'm still going to have to kill some babies because there won't be enough room, but I'll do my best.
Killing all the darlings.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, I want to talk about some of our favorite early 90s horror movies. I've got mine, like In the Mouth of Madness, as we mentioned previously, is a huge favorite of mine. But then, of course, I am a John Carpenter fangirl. I pretty much like just about everything that he's put out. Candyman is another favorite of mine as well, as you could tell by my shirt. And I've got quite a few others, but yeah, what are some of your early 90s favorites?
Tremors is one of my real big favorites.
Oh, yes.
Tremors to me, some of my all-time favorite films, much like Night of the Living Dead remake, which I mentioned, I was very much I just want to go to the movies and hope for the best when I was younger. Now as well, like, listen, I'm always optimistic or cautiously optimistic these days, but back then, especially in the early 90s, you didn't have social media. You may not have even seen the trailer. And so those were the days when you literally opened up the newspaper and said, what's playing at a theater near me? And you've never even heard of it before. And so some of my favorite memories are, like, I remember, and I'm not giving you the answer yet, but like, I remember Fright Night. I remember my girlfriend and I were like, let's see a movie. We just want to go out. We opened up the paper. It's like, I can't remember what was the competition, like Legal Eagles or something like that. You know, I'm like, yeah, it's that or Fright Night. Oh, I'm kind of in a scary movie mood. Okay. But we didn't know what it was. And we just literally saw this poster with a house with sort of ghostly creatures all around it, or one creature. I think I'm already thinking about the second one. But my point is going in blind, hoping for the best, wanting to be entertained, and being just overwhelmingly entertained. Like, this is really good. Like, you sit there watching one of these movies, and I felt this way with Tremors, where I'm like, Tremors, I don't know. Well, Kevin Bacon, Footloose, I don't know. Do I know? Yeah, whatever. I don't know. You couldn't even tell what it really was. It was like, well, they're clearly trying to ape Jaws on this poster. Tremors, I don't know, but I've heard good things about it. Let's go check it out. But anyway, when all of a sudden it turns out to be a much larger production, much more competent production, much more fun and funny and entertaining, and incredibly well-paced production, you're in, and you're like, what a ride. And I always love Tremors for that. I love Bram Stoker's Dracula, beginning to end, by Francis Ford Coppola. That's a movie that, listen, with Coppola, your expectations are high, and then the moment you start watching, you see he's swinging for the fences in terms of film style, creating a classic feel, yet bringing it into brand new territory, so it doesn't feel like a quote unquote remake. And Gary Oldman, who I loved, probably the first really got on my radar from The Professional. But I remember I was a huge fan of Gary Oldman, and I just thought, what a great choice. And they went to town with all the variations and the looks of Dracula, old Dracula, young hot Dracula, old creepy Dracula, bat wolf creature, just so well done. So production design, the music, the costume design. I think the costume design, among many other things, won the Oscar that year. Anyway, listen, I'm just fanboying about Bram Stoker's Dracula. I've lost my train of thought.
I mean, that's what that question was for you to fanboy over stuff. Like, I will make one side comment about Dracula. Old Dracula, that hairstyle, what was up with that?
It's great. Well, it's so iconic that The Simpsons made it hysterical, you know? Where they did a whole Treehouse of Horror where Mr. Burns was the old Dracula. It was so good. Oh, you got to see that if you've never seen it. It's so fun.
Treehouse of Horror, man, I remember growing up on those just Simpsons Halloween episodes. I remember the one where they did a parody of, I think, Poltergeist is what that was.
I'm realizing now, literally as we speak, that among the TV stuff, Treehouse of Horror and The Simpsons is just, that's like a crucial part of did they do the Treehouse of Horror back then? I don't know. I wonder when they started doing the Treehouse of Horror. I'm showing my ignorance here. Okay. But you know, that's something that I think qualifies if they did a couple of those in there, just to at least a passing mention, because it was so fun. Okay, so yeah, Treehouse of Horror, annual series of special Halloween themed anthology episodes of the animated sitcom The Simpsons, with 34 episodes as of 2022.
So the first episode installment aired on October 25th, 1990.
Well, there you go.
No.
There you go.
No.
Anyway, very fun stuff. So more recognition for the cool television stuff.
Yes. Go ahead and mention any other early 90s favorites that you may have. If you could think
So
of
many.
So many.
So many early 90s favorites. Like, here's my problem. You know, anyone who says, well, what's your favorite? You know, listen, it's not a bad question. It's a good question, but it's an unfair question.
I'm sorry.
I'll give you one more. I'll give you one more. Dead Alive.
Okay.
Dead Alive. Dead Alive is just one of those insane movies that I always thought it was probably too gross, not knowing anything about it. I saw this
Yeah.
cover with a woman stretching. You know, is it a woman?
Yeah.
It's like a regular woman, but
stretching like the little thing poking through. Yeah.
And but that was my first exposure to Peter Jackson directly. I think I had seen a bit of Meet the Feebles, yeah, that was my first indoctrination of what it's like to watch a Peter Jackson movie. And it was hilarious. And it became one of my all-time favorite movies, aside from Evil Dead 2, in terms of like just like the splatter and the blood and the way over the top, but just like an absolute sense of humor. And movies like that are at first, when you think it's just going to be straightforward, and then you realize, wait, this is totally A, got a sense of humor, B, just like it's unhinged and how ridiculous it is. But all I'll say is I'll probably just say I think it's that, and I haven't seen it in a long time. I'm excited to do my rewatch. I haven't just watched it in probably 15 years, but because I've seen it. So when you've seen something so many times, you feel like it's fresh, and then you realize a lot of time's gone by. And but there's that dinner scene where I think Grandma's ear like falls in the soup, but no, doesn't quite notice. Or oh God, it's so fun.
Yeah.
How about name one or two more for yourself? I'll put you on the spot.
Oh, okay. Well, we did already mention Tremors. I will have to say, a lot of my early 90s favorites, I was a very young Brandy. So I didn't get to see a lot of those like in theaters. I saw them later on when I was old enough to see them. But amazing. Tremors is one. And I've already mentioned In Search of Darkness. Probably The Silence of the Lambs I can think of as having a really big effect on me, especially Sir Anthony Hopkins' performance as Hannibal Lecter was just so powerful. And it's very like contradictory in the amount of time he was in the movie. Some sites say 8 minutes, some sites say 16 minutes. But when you realize the movie is like about 2 hours and he was only in the movie for that short of time, for him to have that much impact.
Oh yeah,
ooh,
absolutely.
Oof. Yeah, I heard they wanted Gene Hackman at first to play Hannibal Lecter. It's like, I don't see it. Not after that performance by Anthony Hopkins. I just don't see it.
No, you can't. You can't. And of course, a lot of people are like, well, Brian Cox. Why didn't Brian Cox come back? But it's like, I enjoyed Manhunter. I enjoyed Brian Cox's performance. But Anthony Hopkins, I was riveted and mesmerized. Silence of the Lambs also was there's a cool story that I could tell on the record, which is cool, is that when that first came out, a friend of mine was an editor at MGM. And he came back. He lived in the apartment above me in our Burbank apartment complex, and he's a film school friend. And he came back one day and he said, guys, you got to see this movie. It's not done yet. It's coming out in a couple weeks. This is the entire movie, but it doesn't have the soundtrack in it yet. But if you want to watch it, you could watch it. So it's the entire movie complete, just didn't have any score whatsoever. But I'm like, oh, is that the new one? I heard about that with Jodie Foster, the serial killer thing. Let's check it out. So I watched The Silence of the Lambs before it came out on videotape. When I shouldn't have. And I don't even remember any difference. I don't remember anything. Like, all I can remember was after I saw that movie, it was so intense that I remember when I saw it again, I was worried that music was going to ruin it.
Oh my God.
because it was so great without music. It didn't need music. It was just absolutely riveting. And so, of course, it's great. And I think the soundtrack is spectacular. I own the soundtrack. But I remember being a little bit nervous that it wasn't going to be as good because the music was going to take me out of the reality of what had been presented to me. I have a lot of weird kind of memories of a lot of films, and they were just unexpectedly amazing, and I didn't expect them to. My expectations were low, or because of just the circumstances. I'll jump one ahead. I'll jump a whole documentary ahead, and I'll say, based on this conversation, I saw the Blair Witch Project when that was still believed to be true, and someone said, I have the videotape of that movie everyone's talking about. Let's all watch it. And we all watched it, that it was like a found footage film, that it was not a created, crafted film. And we were all blown away by that as well.
So many just interesting stories. I sit here completely riveted. I love hearing all about that. Side note, I was old enough to see the Blair Witch Project. As I was talking 1999, I was 17. Oh my God, I was 17.
Perfect age to just be absolutely terrified and believe it's all true.
Side note, marketing was genius.
That marketing, you know? Yeah.
Yep, 1995 though to 1999. That's the conversation for that time. So don't want to get too far off there. But okay, now about this documentary. How can we get a hold of it other than just screaming to give it to us right now, which I'm trying very hard not to say I want this right now.
I know. Well, you know, we're in pre-production right now. And so the best way to get it is to order it. And much like all our other projects, what's cool is if you order it, you get all these cool things that like your name in the credits. You got to go to 90shorrordoc.com, 90s. 90shorrordoc.com. All our socials are still at 80s horror doc because we have so many followers. It's silly to change it. So we're going to stick with that. So if you go to Instagram, you know, Twitter, Facebook, I think we've got a footprint on TikTok now. But yeah, 90shorrordoc.com between now, from October 6th to October 31st, the witching hour at midnight on Halloween night. That's the time to get it. You also can get your name in the credits, which is super cool. And we have all sorts of activities. Basically, if you just look at what's going on, we're going to have a year-long amount of transparent, cool things that you could do, whether you're talking to me and the filmmakers. We will get some people who are in the project itself to have a Q&A and talk about their experiences making 90s films, and all sorts of just cool discussions, like hangouts like we're doing now, talking about a lot of the cool elements of 90s and early 90s horror, from everything from practical effects to versus CGI, to the transitions that the filmmakers were going through, the classic, you know, directors like Joe Dante or Wes Craven, but you also have the new guys, like I said, you know, Peter Jackson or, you know, M. Night Shyamalan, you know, Guillermo del Toro were just getting their feet wet during that time. David Fincher. It's all really cool conversation that you guys can be part of and be part of this whole experience, and share what you would like to see in this film as we put it together. And so this initial campaign, October 6th to October 31st, go to 90shorrordoc.com. And while I'm plugging the .com stuff, if you are a fan of In Search of Tomorrow, the 80s sci-fi documentary that I just did, we're doing a companion book. So you go to 80sci-fi-book.com, and we're putting together a really cool 300-page book that's the ultimate companion to the documentary, very similar in its layout, 1980 to 1989, chapters in between, a bunch of films within each year. We're going to add some more films that didn't make the final cut of the documentary. We're doing all this cool interactive stuff. Each film at the tail end of the coverage of, you know, the write-up and cool photos and behind the scenes stuff, and quotes from the people who were working on it or experts about it. We'll have a cool little QR code, and that will bring you to unseen footage that didn't make the film that we'll put together, and it'll be a short interview, 3-5 minutes or however long, talking about the film in question that you just read about, but it's expanded material. Not only that, we like to get everyone involved as much as possible. So if you pre-order this book at 80sscifibook.com between now and Christmas Day, you get to have your name in the credits like you do in the movie. You could have your name in print in the book, but we're also having other features. So if you like really have a passion for a particular film, while there's room, because there's room running out, but we get to do it for every single film, and we're going to do 70 plus films in this book. Literally, there's a pull down menu, and you could say, I love Galaxina. I would love to write a couple words about why that movie was so great or influential or insightful or important to me. You can have your name in print with your little mini paragraph talking about what's cool about that. And on top of that, if we're having a page, I know, but wait, there's more. There's a set of Ginsu knives. But what's also cool is at the tail end is we're also going to have a page where if you just want to put instead of a very specific film, you could put your general memories of the 80s and 80s sci-fi movies and why they were so important for you. And in that same space, if you want to put that, you could put a dedication to a loved one, contemporary or who's passed. But all this stuff, you can literally have this in this wonderful coffee table book that you can just immortalize on your shelf and on your coffee table, and feel like you were really very much part of it, in addition to just watching the documentary and being a fan of that era.
That's so cool. Now, where can people go to get that again?
That one's 80s sci-fi book.com between now and December 25th. It's like a great gift. You can give that. It should be available and done and ready in the springtime. If you give it as a gift, we have this cool digital gift certificate that you can give to someone as we all wait for the book, so that you've got something to give to them if you buy it as a gift to someone else. But it's really fun. God, I really enjoy getting to work for Creator VC and working with Robin Block and an amazing, very small team. And we get so much done because we really make these cool products that really engage the audience and the fans and the nostalgia, and it's quality stuff. And, I don't know when I would have been able to make a book based on a movie. Yet here we have this opportunity and we're doing it. It looks beautiful. We've already laid out a bunch of stuff. I'm going to be working on the book. I'll be writing a foreword for the book, and I'll be executive editor of the book. So I will not be writing the book. I don't have the time, unfortunately, to write it.
Yeah.
We'll have a writer, excuse me, we'll have a writer write this book, and I'm overseeing the overall book itself. And it'll sort of remind me of my Famous Monsters, executive editor days.
Awesome. Let's end with some rapid fire Halloween questions. So I've got a few Halloween questions for you. Just say the first answer that comes to your mind. All right. First question, favorite Halloween candy?
Kit Kat. It's between Kit Kat and Nestle's Crunch, but yeah.
Yep.
It's got to have a little crunch to it, a little chocolate, a little crunch, and I'm a happy camper. My teeth aren't, but I'm a happy camper.
The great candy corn debate. Candy corn, yay or nay?
I am 100% behind candy corn. I will stand by candy corn, and I will stand by the variations of candy corn. Like if you've ever tried chocolate candy corn, then like what's to debate about? And if anything, I'm a latecomer. You might all know this, but this is new to me. If you lay out candy corn in a circular design with the points you realize why it's called candy corn. Because if anyone stops to think, why is it? It's not corn. It doesn't look like corn. They're the corn niblets. They're the corn pieces. And when you lay it out in a circular fashion, you could see from the core how it looks like the corn niblet at the end, and then the base. I'm doing a very bad description,
Yeah, I can picture it though.
right? Right.
Yes.
If I keep on doing this with my hands, you'll understand eventually what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Kind of like Pictionary. It's this. It's this.
It's this, Brandy. Yes. Your favorite Halloween costume that you dressed up as?
I always go something spooky or creepy. The only times I've ever been like a known character is when I was a kid and I wanted to be, I was Spock, or I wanted to be, I wanted to be like Luke Skywalker. But I don't think I even found, as much as obsessed as I was about Star Wars, I don't know if I ever was a Star Wars character because I never could find a satisfactory costume. I was that kid who, and I really love those costumes now, so don't get me wrong. But when I was a kid, I was like, don't put a picture of the character's face on the front of the costume because it should be their uniform or their outfit from the movie. Yeah. So like if I wanted to be like Luke Skywalker or Han Solo or even Darth Vader, I immediately was just like, well, screw this. I've got the Darth Vader mask. Why do I have to have a picture of Darth Vader on my chest too? They'll all know that it's a stupid Halloween costume that I got at Woolworths. Forget it.
Yeah.
And I'd be something scary and creepy. So I would say one of my favorites is probably being the Hunchback of Notre Dame when I was a kid. But these days, when I take my kid out trick-or-treating, who this year wants to be a Five Nights at Freddy's character,
oh my goodness.
He wants to be Springtrap. So good luck to me finding a costume because he wants me to make one, and that's anyway, that's a process. But I always go as like a skeleton. I take it back. I lied about I known characters. Lately, also, I have gone out as a Sleestack because I found an awesome Sleestack Land of the Lost costume a couple years ago, and I still fits.
Right. 2 more Halloween questions. Decorating the house for Halloween, yay or nay?
Absolutely, more outside than inside. Inside, although inside every year, and it's already up. I usually get it up by the first weekend of October, if not the last weekend of September. On my mantelpiece, I am obsessed with Limax mini Spooky Village light up houses that are animated and make sound and do all sorts of things. And my whole mantle over my fireplace has probably about 8 or 10 creepy houses and castles and all sorts of fun stuff and little creatures and knickknacks, and it's my little spooky village. I even have a train track where the track's made of bones, and it's a trolley that goes back and forth, a creepy trolley.
I love stuff like that. I do. And then last but not least, trick or treat. Were you the kind of person that likes to play tricks, or did you prefer treats?
I've never been a trick player. I think maybe when I was a teen, where I was too cool to dress up, but I still went out with my friends. So we would dress up as bums, because then that's your excuse to go trick or treating that you wish you do, but you were like too cool to admit that you wanted to go trick or treating. So you bring that can of
silly string.
Well, no, shaving cream.
Oh, shaving cream.
Here's the thing. Back in my day, when we were more mischievous, you would take an aerosol can top from an aerosol can. You pop that off, then you get a can of Barbasol, and you pop it on the top of the Barbasol, so you could really get some distance. And you'd walk around and you'd have shaving cream fights only with the other kids your age. You wouldn't be awful and mean to the young kids.
Okay, that's nice. That's nice.
I stand by that. I was pretty. I think because I got assaulted when I was younger, that I was very thoughtful about not doing it to others. I came back when I once was trick or treating. We got assaulted by other kids with shaving cream. I remember some random person when we went trick or treat, they were like, "Oh, you're covered with shaving cream. Come in, come in." And I remember even then, I was like, I felt safe. Like this is like some mom who's just like, "Oh, you're covered in, come here, come into the kitchen. No, come on, come on, come on. Let me clean you off." And she like
Oh,
cleaned us all off. And then they're like, "Okay, get your candy. Have a good night." A very memory, very fun memory for me.
well, I loved talking with you again, and this time
Likewise.
about 90s horror and 90s like memories and the In Search of Darkness, 1990 to 1994. So once again, David Weiner, thank you so very much for coming and talking with me about all that stuff.
It was my pleasure, Brandy. I really enjoyed coming back, and it's super fun talking about the Halloween stuff and random. I'm king of the tangents, and so it's hard to sort of keep it short and sweet because there's so much fun stuff to talk about. And around Halloween, I love talking about that stuff as well. So I hope you have a wonderful spooky season and Halloween. And I'll throw it back to you real quick before I go. Are you a trick or treater? And what's your favorite candy?
Oh boy, I was a trick-or-treater, big trick-or-treater, not anymore, but my favorite kind of Halloween candy would be the Hershey's Special Dark, because they would only come in the miniatures and you can't ever find them in the big ones. So that would have to be my favorite Halloween candy.
Ah, very, very cool. And of course, you got to find that one house that gives the big candy bars out. That was all.
Oh,
That was
yes.
like the mother love. Like the kids would be like, "You got to go to like, you know,
Yes.
they tell you where and say hurry before they're all gone, and you like stop what you're doing, beeline to the house with big." And then in my neighborhood now, there was that one house when I was a kid, but now with my neighborhood now, there is that one house, and it's always first on the stop, just to make sure that they don't run
Oh yes, I can imagine. And you as well. I hope you have a great spooky season, great Halloween, a great rest of your year if you don't get a chance to talk before then. And just yeah, very much looking forward to the new In Search of Darkness.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you spreading the good word and with your podcast and the vids and all the stuff that you do. You're spreading the word of horror and teaching the word of horror, and I think that's really awesome. And keep on keeping on because you're doing a service as well.
Thank you so much.